The florist called at 7:43 in the morning to confirm the centerpieces, and that was the last normal moment of Serena Marchetti's life. She remembers it clearly, standing in the kitchen of the townhouse she had spent 4 years renovating, phone pressed between her shoulder and her ear, a mug of black coffee going cold on the counter. She said yes to the white peonies, yes to the eucalyptus, yes to the hand-tied ribbon in champagne silk. She wrote the confirmation number on the notepad by the kettle, the one with the little illustrated loons on the cover that her mother had given her last Christmas. Normal, mundane, the kind of Tuesday morning she had taken entirely for granted. The wedding was 3 weeks away. She had spent 22 months planning it. Not obsessively. She was not the kind of woman who filled Pinterest boards with color swatches at midnight. But carefully, the way she did everything. Serena had built her career as a contract negotiator for a mid-sized construction firm in downtown Toronto. And she approached her own wedding the same way she approached a difficult clause. Methodically, with a clear understanding of what she wanted and what she was willing to compromise on. The venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake had a 2-year wait list. She was on it before she was even engaged. Some people called that presumptuous. She called it realistic. The man she was planning to marry was named Tristan Holloway. Tristan was 38, good-looking in the uncomplicated way of men who have never had to work particularly hard at anything, and a partner at a boutique real estate law firm where his name appeared on the letterhead in a font slightly larger than his colleagues. She had met him at a friend's dinner party 6 years ago, and they had fallen into each other's lives the way people do when both of them are ready and the timing is simply right. He was steady, reliable. He remembered her coffee order without being asked, and never left cabinet doors open, and always showed up when he said he would. Or so she believed. She had gone to his office that Tuesday afternoon because he wasn't answering his phone. Not unusual. He often had back-to-back client meetings, but she had a question about the marriage certificate paperwork that required his signature by end of day, and his assistant kept saying he was unavailable, which was unusual. So she drove downtown, badged her way into the building with the visitor pass she'd had for years, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The door to his private office was not fully closed. Later, Serena would think about that detail more than almost any other. Not the sounds she heard before she pushed the door open. Not the expression on Tristan's face when he saw her. Not even the face of the woman with him, which she recognized immediately because she had last seen it at her own kitchen table, eating the pasta bake Serena had made from scratch, because she was trying to learn their mother's recipe before the wedding, wanting to feel connected to her family. It was her younger sister, Gwendolyn. She did not scream. She did not throw anything. She simply stood in the doorway for what felt like several years, but was probably 4 seconds, and then she turned around, walked back to the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and stood very still while the floors counted down. In the lobby, she asked the security guard, a young man with a kind face who had seen her dozens of times, if he could call her a cab. Her voice came out completely level. She would think about that later, too. The absolute flatness of her own voice in that moment. The cab driver asked if she was all right. She said yes. She was not. She directed him not to her townhouse, not to her mother's house in Scarborough, not to her best friend Pauline's apartment in the annex. She doesn't entirely know why. She just knew she could not sit still inside a familiar space and have any of the people who loved her look at her right now. She needed in some way she couldn't articulate to be anonymous. Invisible. To be in a room where no one knew her name or her story, or the fact that she had confirmed the centerpieces with white peonies that very morning. She told the driver to take her to the King Street strip, and he did. She ended up in a bar called Carrick and Bone, which she had walked past hundreds of times without ever going inside. It was the kind of place that looked better at night. All dark wood and leather and low light, the kind of bar that belonged to a different decade and didn't particularly care if you agreed. It was 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and she was one of perhaps 8 people inside. She sat at the bar, still in her work clothes. The charcoal blazer, the silk blouse, the earrings she'd bought in Paris 3 years ago on a trip with Tristan. And ordered a whiskey she didn't know the name of, because she simply pointed at a bottle on the shelf, and the bartender, who had the quiet professionalism of someone who had seen everything and would judge none of it, poured without comment. She sat with the glass for a long time without drinking it. The Glenfarclas tends to go down easier if you actually drink it. The voice came from 2 stools to her left. She hadn't noticed him when she sat down, which should have been surprising, because he was not a man who was easy to overlook. He was perhaps 50, perhaps younger, the kind of face that held its age with a certain deliberate stillness. Dark suit, no tie, collar open. There was a quality to the way he sat that she would find herself thinking about later. Completely relaxed and completely alert, both at once, like an animal that had learned to appear at rest without ever actually being so. She didn't answer him. "You've been staring at it for about 20 minutes, he said. Not unkindly, simply as a matter of observation. "I'm building up to it," she said. "Fair enough." He lifted his own glass slightly, a gesture that was not quite a toast but acknowledged her, somehow in the most minimal way. He looked back at whatever he had been looking at, which appeared to be nothing in particular. She drank the Glenfarclas. It was in fact considerably easier than she expected. She ordered another. She was not a woman who drank heavily. She was also not a woman who found her fiancé with her younger sister on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks before a wedding that had taken nearly 2 years to plan. Both things were newly true of her. She was recalibrating. By the second drink she had taken off her blazer. By the third she had told the bartender, whose name was apparently Declan, though she had not asked, that she was supposed to get married in 23 days, and had just discovered that the man she was marrying had been sleeping with her sister. Declan had listened with the kind of focused attention that good bartenders and good therapists share, and said, "That's a hard Tuesday," which she thought was possibly the most accurate sentence she had ever heard. At some point, the man 2 stools over had become the man on the stool beside her. She wasn't entirely sure when. She had not noticed the transition, only that at a certain point she was talking not to him specifically but perhaps in his direction, and he was listening in a way that was different from Declan's listening. More considered, somehow. Less reflexively sympathetic. "She was trying on my wedding shoes," Serena said. She hadn't planned to say that part. "When I found out, I saw them on the floor of his office. They were ivory satin, and I was going to return them anyway, because they were half a size too small, and I couldn't walk properly in them. But they were mine, and she had no business touching them." The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The shoes seem important." "They're not important at all," she said. "That's the whole point. The shoes are completely meaningless. The wedding is meaningless. 22 months of planning is." She stopped. "I put the deposit on the venue before he even proposed." "Did you know that?" "I called the venue and I paid $3,000 before there was even a ring, because that's who I am. I plan things. I secure things. I don't leave things to chance." She turned the glass in her hands. "And here I am." He looked at her with something that was not pity, which she appreciated. "My name is Serena," she said, which she had not intended to say either. The whiskey was doing things. "Callum," he said. "Callum," she repeated, trying it out. A good, solid Canadian name. "What do you do, Callum?" There was a pause. Not a hesitation exactly. More the pause of a man deciding what version of the truth to tell. "Development," he said. "Private acquisitions. My fiancé is a real estate lawyer," she said. Then, "My former fiancé." The word tasted strange. She filed it away for later examination. "I'm sorry to hear that," Callum said. She wasn't sure he meant for the career overlap or the implosion of her engagement, and she didn't ask. At 7:30, her phone had 46 unread messages, and she had no intention of looking at any of them. At 8, Callum. She still only had the one name. Ordered food without her asking. And the bartender produced 2 plates of something that smelled like garlic and butter and red wine, and she ate without thinking about it, because she had not eaten since morning, and her body had made the decision independently. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," he said at one point, which she appreciated, because she had been mid-sentence, and had suddenly realized she wasn't sure she wanted to finish it. "I'm very good at my job," she said instead. "I negotiate contracts for a living. Multi-million-dollar contracts. I've sat across from people who have been in boardrooms longer than I've been alive, and I've held the line. I don't break. I don't flinch." She heard the edge in her own voice. "I didn't even cry, you know. Not once the whole way here." He was quiet. "That's probably not normal," she said. "It might be the most normal thing I've heard today," he said. The bar was fuller now. Friday energy, arriving a few days early, or just the particular gravitational pull of King Street at 9 o'clock. The light had changed, the music had gotten slightly louder, and Serena noticed, in a way she hadn't quite registered earlier, that the people around Callum moved differently when they passed him. Not averting, more the way water moves around a stone. She had been a contract negotiator for 11 years. She read rooms for a living. She noticed things. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "I told you. You told me a name and an industry." "That's not the same thing." Something shifted in his expression. "Not much, but enough. You're perceptive," he said. "I'm sober enough to be perceptive and drunk enough not to care about the answer," she said. "It's a fairly narrow window." "I'd use it if I were you." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The firm is called the Carrick Group. You won't find much about it." "Carrick and Bone, Carrick Group." She looked at the name above the bar, hand-painted in gold on dark wood. "You own this bar," she said. "Among other things." "Among other things," she repeated. She thought about the way people moved around him, the way Declan had placed his drink without being asked, the way the table beside them had quietly emptied when he arrived, though she hadn't registered it at the time. What kind of private acquisitions? "The kind that get complicated," he said. And she heard, underneath that, the kind of sentence that was not finished because the rest of it was not safe to finish. She was not naive. She had grown up in Toronto, had lived in this city for 38 years, and she understood the difference between men who were powerful in ways that printed in the Globe and Mail, and men who were powerful in ways that didn't. She looked at him for a long moment. "Are you dangerous?" she asked. "To most people," he said. "Not to you." She should have left. She knew that, even at the time. She had enough of her faculties to understand that the correct response to that sentence was to finish her drink, thank him for the company, get in a cab, and go home to her own townhouse where she was going to have to begin the process of dismantling everything she had spent 2 years building toward. Instead, she said, "Tell me about the complicated acquisitions." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite categorize. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. "Why?" he asked. "Because," she said, "I have 46 unread messages, and I have absolutely no interest in thinking about any of them. And you seem like someone who has problems that are significantly larger and more interesting than mine." That was the night she learned about the Carrick Group. Not all of it, not even close to all of it, but enough to understand that Callum Devereux— that was how he introduced himself the second time, properly, around midnight, when the bar had thinned out again— was not simply a real estate developer. The Carrick Group handled acquisitions that other firms couldn't, wouldn't, or had learned not to touch. Disputed properties, off-market transactions in territories where the market wasn't the only interested party, land with histories that didn't appear in any registry. He spoke about it obliquely, carefully, in a way that told her two things simultaneously: that he trusted almost no one with this information, and that he had decided, for reasons she didn't fully understand, to trust her with the outline of it. She listened the way she listened to contracts, hearing what was said, hearing what was implied, hearing the gaps. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, around the time Declan started wiping down the far end of the bar. "Because you asked," Callum said. "People ask you things all the time," she said. "I doubt you answer like this." He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said, "I don't." She got home at 1:30 in the morning. She sat in the kitchen with the notepad with the illustrated loons on it. The confirmation number for the centerpieces still written at the top in her own handwriting, and she thought about what she was going to do. She called Tristan at 7 the next morning. She did not yell, she did not cry, she was precise and she was clear, and she covered the significant points in approximately 9 minutes. The venue deposit, the caterer's cancellation policy, the invitations, 140 of them, which had already been mailed, the mortgage on the townhouse, which was only in her name anyway because she'd had the better credit rating, and they hadn't gotten around to adding his. She had done the math already. She knew which losses were recoverable and which weren't. She did not mention Gwendolyn. That was a different conversation for a different day. Tristan said her name twice, in a tone that suggested he wanted to explain something. She said, "Please don't." And then she hung up. She called the venue, the florist, the caterer, the dress boutique. She made notes on a fresh page of the Loon notepad. She was systematic. She handled it like a project, because handling it like a project was the only way she could handle it at all, and she was wise enough about herself to understand that. She did not call her mother. Not yet. She also did not stop thinking about Callum Devereux. She told herself that was the whiskey. Then she was fully sober and she was still thinking about it, which made the explanation less convincing. 3 days later, she went back to Carrick and Bone. She told herself she was going because it was 2 blocks from a client meeting and she wanted a quiet place to review her notes. This was not entirely false. It was also not entirely the reason. He was there. She wasn't sure whether to find that surprising or not. He had, she would learn, a certain regularity about his habits, a quality she recognized in herself and found oddly steadying in him. "You came back," he said. Not as a question. "I had a client meeting nearby," she said. "Right," he said. He looked like he was trying not to smile. He mostly succeeded. She sat down. Declan appeared with 2 glasses without being asked. She found herself thinking that there was something extraordinarily efficient about this place, if you happened to be Callum Devereux. "I looked up the Carrick group," she said. "And?" "Almost nothing." "Which is itself information." "Yes," he said. "It is. There's a deal going through the Ontario Municipal Board right now," she said. "Disputed land north of Barrie. 43 acres. 3 parties claiming historical title. The public records are a complete mess. But I found the original survey from 1887 and the subsequent registration, and if I'm reading it correctly, the chain of ownership has a 7-month gap in 1931 that would make the entire current title questionable." She paused. "I spent 4 hours on it last night. I'm not entirely sure why." Callum had gone very still in the way she was beginning to recognize. The very still that was actually heightened attention. "That gap," he said slowly, "is the entire reason there are 3 parties at the municipal board instead of 1. "I know," she said. "Someone filled that gap with something that doesn't hold up, and everyone has been too busy fighting each other to look at the 1887 document. It's in the archives, physical copy." She picked up her drink. "I'm good at contracts, Callum. I'm good at reading what's underneath them." He looked at her for a long time. "I have a proposition," he said. "I assumed you might. The proposition was this. The Carrick Group needed someone who could navigate complex title and contract disputes in a way that was entirely above board, entirely legal, and entirely without connection to the Carrick name. A consultant. Independent. The work would be legitimate, genuinely, documentably legitimate, even if the clients it ultimately served were not always operating in the strictly conventional space. She would be distanced from that. She would be protected from it. "Protected," she said. Yes, she thought about that word. She was 38 years old, and no one had ever used that word in relation to her before, because she had always been the one managing her own protection, building in safeguards, reading the clauses, paying the deposit before the ring. "How much of what you do is legal?" she asked. "More than people assume," he said. "Less than it appears on paper. That's not a number." "No," he said. "It's not." She thought about the townhouse she was going back to every night, the Loon notepad on the counter, the 46 messages she had finally read, and then deleted, and then tried very hard not to think about. She thought about Gwendolyn, who had called twice, and left voicemails that Serena had not listened to and was not ready to listen to, and their mother, who knew something was wrong but not yet what, and the way the rest of Serena's very carefully constructed life was in the process of reorganizing itself around a hole she had not anticipated. She thought about the Barrie property and the 1887 survey document and the 7-month gap in 1931 that she had found in 4 hours because she had been restless and looking for a problem she was actually equipped to solve. "The work I do for you," she said, "is entirely mine. I work independently. I come to you with what I find. I don't take instruction on what to find." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation. "If I discover something in the course of that work that I believe crosses a line, I reserve the right to withdraw." "Agreed," he said again. "And I need to know," she said, "that the protection you're describing is real, not a talking point, not a hedge." He looked at her then with something that was completely unguarded, which on his face was remarkable for its rarity. "Serena," he said, "I don't make promises I can't keep." She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure she should, and she believed him anyway. She started the following Monday. The work was, in the most fundamental sense, exactly what she was best at: title searches, contract analysis, historical documentation, municipal filings that had been deliberately obfuscated, records that required cross-referencing across 3 provinces and occasionally 2 countries, agreements that had been written to look like one thing and function as another. She was exceptional at it. In the same quiet and unheroic way she was exceptional at most things. Through attention and patience and an almost physical discomfort with leaving a loose thread unpulled. She saw Callum regularly. At Carrick and Bone, primarily, though occasionally at meetings that happened in offices she was not given the addresses of in advance. She met the people around him in increments. A lawyer named Hartwell who communicated almost exclusively in monosyllables, a woman called Oren who managed the Carrick Group's above-ground portfolio and had the organizational clarity of someone running a small government. She understood gradually the shape of the thing she had stepped into. It was not uncomplicated. She had known that from the start. What she had not anticipated was Callum himself. She was an observant woman. She prided herself on it. She knew she was drawn to him, and she watched that carefully, the way she watched anything she was not sure she could trust, including herself. She noted the way he listened, which was total and unperforming. The way he was blunt without being unkind, which was rarer than it should be. The way he clearly found her useful and clearly found her interesting, and the way those 2 things were not, for him, the same thing. He had told her early on that he had been briefly married a long time ago. He said it the way people do when they're giving you a data point, not an invitation. She heard both things and didn't push. 2 months into the arrangement, she found something she was not supposed to find. It was in the historical documentation for a project in the distillery district. A straightforward conversion on the surface, a heritage building, into mixed commercial use. She was pulling land registry records going back to 1902, and she found, embedded in a 1978 incorporation document, a name that appeared in an entirely different context in a report she had read 3 years ago. A report about a federal investigation into construction bid rigging that had ultimately gone nowhere. Not Callum. Not the current entity. A predecessor company, nearly 50 years old, structurally dissolved. But the pattern she recognized, the shape of how the holding structure was set up, was the same shape she was looking at right now in the distillery district filing. She sat with it for 2 days. Then she drove to Carrick and Bone on a Wednesday evening, and she sat down across from him and she put the documents on the bar. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. "You found this," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "How?" she explained. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for another long moment, and she felt, as she sometimes did with him, that the silence was actually full, that he was doing more thinking in it than most people did in conversation. "This is the thing I told you about," he said. "The part I said was less than it appears on paper." "I know," she said. "I worked that out. Does it change your assessment?" She thought about the question seriously, which she owed to both of them. "No," she said. "The structure is problematic historically. What you're doing now with the distillery filing is legitimate. I've reviewed every current document. The problem is the lineage, not the present. And the lineage is discoverable, eventually, by someone. I'm telling you now because I found it, and you should know that I found it." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted into something she could not quite name. Something that was not quite gratitude and not quite relief, but was in the direction of both. "You could have not told me," he said. "I told you in the beginning," she said. "I don't take instruction on what to find." "No," he said. "You told me you reserved the right to withdraw. You didn't tell me you'd report back instead." "I'm telling you now," she said. "Because you need to dissolve the 1978 holding structure properly and rebuild the distillery title chain from the 1990 corporation forward. It's fixable. I can do it for you. But it needs to be done, and it needs to be done before anyone else gets to the same archive I found." He was very still. "You're not leaving," he said. "I told you," she said. "I reserve the right to withdraw if I find something that crosses a line. 50-year-old bid rigging in a dissolved entity does not cross my line, but I'd like to fix it if you're going to let me." He looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said. "I'm going to let you." That was the night the thing between them stopped being purely professional, though neither of them said so, and nothing changed outwardly, and she drove home afterward to the townhouse and made herself a cup of the tea she kept for nights when she couldn't sleep, and sat with the Loon notepad in front of her and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she was not afraid. She had been afraid, she realized, for a very long time before that Tuesday afternoon in the florist's call and the open office door. Afraid of the thing falling apart. Afraid of the loss. And then they had survived the first hour, and the first day, and the first month, and the fear had turned out to be bigger than the actual event, which was how it almost always went with the things you dreaded most. She was not afraid of Callum Devereux. She was not afraid of what she had walked into. She was clear-eyed about it. The complications, the risk, the fact that the women in his world were probably not supposed to be contract analysts who found 50-year-old evidence in archive boxes and brought it to him over a whiskey on a Wednesday night. She thought she might in fact be exactly suited for it. Gwendolyn called again in October, Serena answered. The conversation was not easy and was not short. She let her sister talk, and then she said what she needed to say, and she did not pretend that it was okay because it wasn't, and might not be for a very long time. But she listened. That felt like something. It felt like a place to begin. Her mother came for dinner the following Sunday, and they made the pasta bake together. Serena had finally gotten the recipe right, as it turned out, and the problem had simply been the ratio of ricotta. And her mother said, halfway through the second glass of wine, that she had always thought Tristan was perfectly nice, but had never quite understood what Serena had seen in him. Reliable, Serena said. Her mother looked at her. You're reliable enough for both of you, she said. You don't need someone reliable. You need someone who can keep up with you. The Distillery District project closed in November. Clean title, properly constructed chain of ownership from 1990 forward, the 1978 issue documented and correctly classified as a dissolved historical liability. Hartwell sent her a transfer and a brief email in his characteristic style that she had come to understand was for him effusive. She went to Carrick and Bone the evening after it closed, and Callum was there, and Declan poured without being asked. And she sat beside him at the bar, where she had sat that first Tuesday evening 9 months ago, with her blazer on and her Paris earrings and a whiskey she didn't know the name of. It's done, she said. I know, he said. Hartwell told me. Good. He turned his glass slowly. How are you? She thought about the question. Outside, it was November, and the street was doing what Toronto streets do in November. All gray light and exhaled breath, and the sound of the city going on regardless. She thought about the venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which had already rebooked her slot. The ivory shoes she had finally returned. The Loon notepad, which was full now and which she had replaced with a plain one, because somehow it felt important to let the illustrated loons go. Better, she said. And then, because it was true, and she was not a woman who hid from true things. Good, actually. I'm good. He looked at her. I have another property, he said. Northern Ontario. Complicated history. It's going to take someone who doesn't flinch. Tell me about it, she said. And she meant all of it. She meant the property, and the history, and the complication. She meant the man sitting beside her and the bar that bore his name, and the life she had walked into sideways on the worst Tuesday she could remember, which had turned out to be the most important Tuesday of her life. She meant all of it, and she was not afraid.